Those are the dulcet tones I think you can hear of Mark Slade, who's just waiting on Zoom to my left. Hi, Mark. We'll bring him into the show very shortly, but welcome to the live stream. It's the Wednesday before the US Grand Prix, one of the US Grand Prix. I don't know how many we got this year. Too many, I think. It's a sprint race too. Very annoying, isn't it? At Indianapolis. Not Indianapolis, what am I saying? I wish it was at Indianapolis, actually. I used to love those Formula One races at Indianapolis. No, it's at Austin, at the Circuit of Americas. And you all know that track. It's a spectacular track. It's a wonderful spectator venue. And there'll be, no doubt, hundreds of thousands of fans there with their motorhomes and all their other stuff. They'll have lots of aerials projecting from those motorhomes too on the straight, don't they? I'm intrigued to know if they're all sort of scanning all the teams or whether they're listening to the football or what's going on there. But anyway, we have the US Grand Prix and we have Mark Slade to talk to us about that, building up to the sort of challenges that will be faced by the teams as they go into this circuit. And also other questions you may well want to put to Mark. He did a brilliant job last time we had him on the show, talking about some of his racing past and so much of that, so much experience at so many teams. And very articulate too. Anyway, moving on, it's been an interesting week. We've had Zak Brown, not Zak Brown personally, but Zak Brown taken to court by Alex Palou. And full marks to Alex Palou for this one. He's basically suing McLaren because he had a contract with them effectively to head him in the direction of Formula One. And just when he thought it was going well, and I have to say, when he did that test for McLaren on a Friday in Mexico a couple of years ago, I did say at the time that he looked superb in the car. I've always been an Alex Palou fan ever since Adrian Campos ran him in Formula 3, GP3. I think it's a shame on the Formula One teams that they never ever saw that talent and did anything with him. But now he's in America, proving everything that we always knew about him. But he's got a point, hasn't he? He's got a point that if they were going to sack Daniel Ricciardo, why wasn't Alex Palou in the frame to fill that seat? That's the way he would argue it, I guess. And, but they got Oscar Piastri. Well, I would say, and no one can defend or attack this, that Alex Palou is probably as talented as Oscar Piastri. I think he would have done a very similar job. That's in no way to decry the talent of Oscar Piastri, but I really rate Alex Palou. And it'll be interesting to see what happens there in court, really. It's good to see that he's doing that, actually. Somebody's actually standing up to the hierarchy. Excellent. And what else? The other big bit of news, which I thought was just brilliant, is Kalle Rovanperä deciding that he's had enough of rallying. He's only, he's 23 or something, 2 world championships, and he's going to go into single-seater racing, and not just Formula 4 or Formula 3. He's going to go to Super Formula in Japan. But the super quick cars, very competitive, very difficult to beat the locals with all their knowledge. And he's going to go and do that with the backing of Toyota, which is good. Presumably means he's going to do some Haas F1 testing, I guess, with their Toyota link, with a view to getting into F2 in 27, and then, who knows, Formula 1. So good on Kalle Rovanperä. And he makes the point, and he's absolutely correct. And it bears out, I think, everything I've always said about the relationship between rallying and the rest of racing, if you like, the rest of motorsport. And that is, if you are very, very good at rallying, it does set you up well for whatever you're going to do next, because there are so many variables, so many things, so many unknowns, and you have to get your hands dirty as well. I think that's a really important point. Something on the car in the middle of a stage, you have to get out of the car, you have to fix it yourself with your co-driver alone, in the rain, the dust, the heat, whatever, the snow. And I think that's a great step forward from the 17-year-olds who arrive at, McLaren or Ferrari or Williams Academy thing with a briefcase and a laptop, not even a briefcase, just a laptop and a backpack. And they're suddenly sort of would-be Formula One drivers. And it's Kalle Rovanperä. I've been watching his progress with great interest. Anyway, Mark Slade's been waiting long enough, so I'm going to bring him into with the hopefully the incredibly seamless technology of Peter Windsor. We're going to bring him into the show. And there he is, Mark. Good to see you. Can you hear me all right?
Yeah, very good. Thanks. Yourself?
Yeah, I can hear you too. Excellent. Good to see you. We're going to do some questions, but before we do that, Mark, I'd just like to get your input on Austin, what you think of it as a race engineer, what sort of challenges the circuit throws up.
Yeah, it's quite a difficult track for a variety of reasons. Firstly, you've got the first sector, which is mostly high-speed corners. And then the rest of the lap, you've got quite a lot of low-speed stuff. it's quite wind affected, particularly in the first sector. So the direction that the wind's blowing makes a huge difference in sector 1. So typically it's a tailwind, which makes the cars quite unstable in the high speed. And then you get into you turn left at, as it turn 10, and then you're heading towards the slower part, and that's all understeering and out of the wind. So getting that right, getting the compromise right between those two sort of parts of the track is really important. With these current generation cars, there's so much downforce that they don't. The simulations tell you don't need to run a lot of wing, but if you have that stability problem, you often find that running a bit more wing than the simulations say will actually stabilise the car a bit and make the drivers a bit more happy. The other big factor on this one is that it was built on quite unstable ground, and it's quite bumpy. And those bumps tend to vary from year to year as the ground moves. So you never quite know what you're going to get. A couple of years ago, I think they did some work trying to level it out, and it was quite successful compared to the previous year. But it may well be that the ground has shifted again in that time, and it could be that there are some more bumps that they're going to have to contend with. So that has quite a big effect on how low you can set the car. And also, if you're a team that does well by running your car stiff, you're going to pay a price on this track because of those bumps. And the other thing is just some of the corners are quite tricky. So turn 1, there's quite a bit of warp at the apex, and if you cut the corner too tight, particularly the car that's quite stiff, as Kev found out in qualifying a couple of years ago, Kev Magnussen, you can lose the car badly there. And then I'm trying to remember the corner numbers now. There's the penultimate left-hander. It's quite a quick corner, and there are some bumps on the entry to that, which make the rear unstable. But then you get quite a lot of understeer in the middle of that corner as well. So that's quite a tricky one. And the tyres get a hard time, particularly the left front, because of I think it's 16, 17 is a very fast, long. It's 2 corners effectively in numbers, but it's one very long corner towards the end of the lap, and that really places a lot of demand on the left front, as do some of those corners in the first sector. So you tend to find a lot of graining early in the weekend, and then as the weekend progresses, the track grip comes up and that reduces. And I think last year we saw in the sprint race there was a lot of graining, and then in the main event the teams were actually a bit surprised at how long the tyres lasted, and a lot of the teams extended their first stints to make it a one-stop race, whereas based on the sprint race, you'd have been pretty sure it was a 2-stop. So yeah, it's a tough track, and there's a lot of variables. I think the wind direction, I had a quick look at the forecast, and it looks like it's going to be a tailwind for most of Friday and Saturday in Sector 1, but it's going to be a headwind on Sunday. So that's going to change the characteristics of the car to some extent. And the temperature is really high. It's looking like low 30s. So that's going to be pretty tough for the tyres to deal with as well. So it's quite a challenge.
Mark, so many points, good points you raised there. Speaking of raising, can we just talk about ride heights and how they will go out on Friday, bearing in mind, of course, they have very limited on-time running, it being a sprint weekend. How quickly can you define if the ride height is too low? We see sparks from cars in the race when presumably the ride height's okay. So what is the adjudicating factor there in terms of, this is the point we want?
I'm not sure if all the teams are the same, but you can you have load sensors where the front strut is, I would imagine, on most cars, and you can quantify the energy input into the skids, and you can actually, to some extent, work out the amount of wear you're expecting to see on the skids, and so you will have set your ride heights based on previous knowledge and simulation. You will use the first couple of runs in P1, so particularly the first run, to try and get the ride heights as close as possible, and then adjust. You've got sprint qualifying where you're using DRS, and the front skids get a lot more wear because of the way DRS works. Lifting up the back of the car tilts the front of the floor down. So for qualifying, you get a lot more skid wear than you do in the race where you use DRS less. So you have to factor in how many laps of DRS you're expecting to do through through the first part of the event and set your ride height accordingly. Obviously, what you have is a short sprint race, so you can actually set your ride heights lower for sprint quali and sprint race than you can for main quali and the main race, just because you're doing fewer laps generally, particularly at the rear. So it's all done. It's quite I'm going to say scientific, but it's quite a controlled process now of getting to the correct ride heights. Of course, that's all dependent on stiffness. So you'll use the simulation software. If you want to change the stiffness, you use the software to match your ride heights in a given condition that is your limit, so that you're always in the right ballpark. And obviously, changing downforce, changing aero, all those things have an effect on that as well.
Fascinating. Tailwind. The most impressive corner, to my mind, is the entrance to the fast S's. I guess that's still in sector 1. I'm sure it's sector 1. Yes. It's a left-hander and then a right. It's really quick. I don't know if it's flat or not, but seriously quick. Yeah. 2
is flat. I think 3 is flat as well, and then you're sort of gradually reducing speed as you go through 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, up to 9. It's. I believe it was modelled after Suzuka Sector 1, wasn't it? I think they tried to incorporate best bits of different tracks in their layout. Funnily enough, it doesn't quite come across that way to the drivers. I guess there are subtle variations that mean that it is actually quite different in the way they drive it. I'd say Suzuka is a more difficult, more technical first sector than Austin. And Austin, it seems easier for the drivers to pick up the correct line, but it's still a very difficult one for the cars to manage.
Yeah, and I think that's because at the top of the hill, it's a slow corner, as distinct from Suzuka, where it actually gets quicker at the top as you're coming out of Dunlop, and then there's a straight to reward how well you've done through the S's. But at Austin, it kind of nullifies any mistakes you've made because it's a slow corner anyway. I think you've got to get down to 3rd or 4th or something like that. But going back to that point of going into the S's and how quick that entry is, where if it's a tailwind, will that be a crosswind at that point, or will that be a tailwind going into that corner?
Pretty much a tailwind. It's almost
wow.
a pure tailwind generally, because I think the wind will come from the southwest, and I think that's almost a pure tailwind as you approach that part of the lap. And the effect is to reduce rear downforce, whilst the front is not that badly affected. So and you lose quite a lot of rear downforce with the tailwind. It's obviously just airspeed, but then you've got the rest of the lap where you're either got a side wind, a crosswind from the inside, or a headwind, and then you need a stronger front end. For some reason, my phone's telling me I need to add effects using hand gestures, so I'll just turn that off. So that's what makes it a challenge, because you can't just take front end out of the car to make the first sector stable, because you'll then really struggle around the rest of the lap. So it's whoever comes up with the best compromise. There's a lot of cleverness in the aero on the cars these days, which isn't just about efficiency. A lot of it is about balance as well. So the backing off of the front wings, which all the teams are doing to greater or lesser extent, that is largely to do with trying to achieve this nice balance between high speed and low speed. Because basically, if the wind backs off at high speed, you've got less front end in the high speed corners relative to the low speed corners. And that's what they're trying to achieve, because the Pirelli tyres have a very poor lateral grip capability, particularly at low speeds. So you're always going to have apex understeer. So you need to set the car up with a lot of front end for the apexes, but that inevitably means high speed corners. The entries become very unstable. And so this is one of the biggest challenges the teams have.
And just as an added complication, Pirelli for Austin are going to have unusually a very, very small gap between the hard and the medium, and a much bigger gap then to the soft. What are the implications of that, do you think?
Well, they've gone C1, C3, C4, isn't it? So I think it's the big gap is between the medium and the hard.
Let me just check that. Well, carry on talking while I check that. Yeah.
I thought that's what they did, and because they said they wanted to try and make it more likely to be a two-stop race. And my understanding was they were basically trying to make the hard tyres slower.
Right, it could well be the case. I just need to check.
So you'd be more likely to run 2 mediums, I guess, and either a hard or a soft, was my understanding.
Yeah, it says here the teams will have a trio. I'll go back to me. Have a trio of compounds that features an extra step between the hard and the medium soft pair. Yeah. So it'd be an interesting experiment to see if this could lead to a greater choice of strategies on one of the most complete tracks on the calendar. Yeah, you're right. So it says, so excuse my, yeah.
C2, C3, C4.
Yeah.
The soft was too soft to be a sensibly raceable tyre. And I think the teams were actually worried that you need actually to do 2 hards and a medium in the race, but because the graining turned out to be much less of an issue, because most of them started on the medium, they found they could push that tyre a lot longer and then just do one stint on the hard to the end. Whereas I get the impression that they're sort of saying, well, if we make the hard even harder, it'll have poor grip. So in terms of race time, you'll be better off doing 2 mediums and a hard, or possibly even a soft and 2 mediums, or I think that's unlikely. But the trouble with that is, it might work, but purely because the medium just becomes a tyre that, because it's, the hard, because it's such a low grip tyre, it might actually degrade quite quickly. So they might be forced onto the mediums from that point of view. It just seems a slightly funny way of trying to achieve a 2-stop race by putting a hard tyre in, but I think that's what they're trying to do.
But given the compressed time of the sprint weekend, how will the teams approach the solution for that problem?
It does make life very difficult, because they just don't have enough practice time to get it right for the sprint. But then you have a sprint race, and that tends to give you a lot more information. So they'll have to choose either a medium or a hard, most likely a hard, I suspect, to run in P1. But they'll really be looking for the sprint race, where they'll probably run one of the mediums from sprint quali, and they'll look at that to give them as much information as they can. But honestly, as I said last year, I think it was a surprise that we could do a one-stop race. So I think they'll be probably starting the main event on a medium, and they'll just see how it goes in that race, and then they'll take decisions based on how that first medium goes, because the track evo will be significant, and you've got that change in wind direction for Sunday as well, which is going to affect things as well. And the other thing is that the drivers will manage the tyres differently. So it's very difficult to test all these different things in the one practice session that they have before sprint qualifying. In fact, it's impossible. So they're going to have to do it on the fly. And the people who are more flexible and more open to adapting will be the ones that are more successful.
How much time generally do you get after FP1 on a sprint weekend to sit around and discuss what you're going to do? What is the actual time frame like before you go into Parc Fermé for qualifying? And how frenetic is that meeting that you're having at that point?
Yeah, well, if you've had a trouble-free first practice session, then you can easily fill I think you've got 2.5 hours. Sorry, I've just got a message. To make your choices, but you don't have a lot to go on, and so there'll be some obvious things that you can do, and then you'll be sort of crossing your fingers a little bit, to be honest. But for the teams, remember that you only score points up to 8th position in the sprint, and for the teams in the mid to back, they're basically not going to score points. They're already resigned to that. So they will pretty much use qualifying in the sprint race as a test session for getting the best race set up for the main event. Whereas the bigger teams obviously are going for the points. So they've probably got a little less scope to be experimental. It's a bit of a strange setup, the sprint weekend, I have to say. I'm not sure whether it makes it better or worse. It's certainly, you approach it differently depending where you are on the grid. But personally, I feel that the points to 8th, it's a real shame, because it makes, certainly if you're the team that's going to be out in Q1, you're just driving round, really. You're just having to take part because you have to, and you know that you're really not going to benefit from anything, or you're not going to get points unless sprint race, Saturday morning starts wet or something strange like that. But it's a bit of a strange feeling going into this important part, a big part of the weekend that you're really not going to get much out of, other than hopefully learning something about the car.
And then, of course, there's always the possibility you may not even get out of the first corner anyway, so all your whole test program has gone out the window too. Mark, we've talked about the track and all that, thank you, brilliant stuff, but what is it like in the pits there now? My experience was that they didn't actually finish everything exactly to the standards that Formula One wanted in terms of the width of the garages. What's it like now?
The garages are quite small, and there are the sort of tented team hospitality units stroke team offices, which they increased those to 2-story a few years back to give the teams more space. But I don't know if it's true, but I understood that when they looked to build that track, the people from Austin came to European races and saw the pits in Barcelona, for instance, and thought, this is what we need to build. And no one told them that obviously at those European races, they have the trucks and the team's motorhomes. And the US people didn't realise all that stuff wouldn't be coming to the flyaway races. So they built a pit complex that was basically similar in size to Barcelona. And of course, when the teams arrived, or when the representatives went there for the first time, they said, well, where's the space for all the other stuff we need? And it was a bit of a surprise. So I think it was, I don't know if that's apocryphal, but when you look at it, it kind of looks like, that's probably what did happen.
I think it's what did happen. I think it was also a little bit of a shortfall on budget as well. So it kind of fitted in with the situation. Oh, it's too late to do anything now. And here we are, the teams. Would you say they're struggling? It's a difficult race from that point of view. What's it like in the garage in terms of width and the breathing space for the teams?
To be fair, with the bigger temporary stuff that they put out the back, it's okay. It's a bit on the tight side, but it's similar to other tracks we go to, like Melbourne. The garages aren't very big there as well, so the teams get by. It's okay. No one really complains because everyone loves being there. Austin's one of the places that all the teams enjoy going to. All the people in the teams enjoy going to. It's a bit more of a relaxed environment, and everyone knows that they're going to enjoy the weekend, even if the racing doesn't go so well. So that's a nice thing about it.
Yeah, wonderful thing, and lots going on in Austin town, great atmosphere there. But for the race personnel, the Formula One personnel, they're beginning a big leg now away from home, right? This is a lot of travelling ahead of them now. Just talk us through that feeling of knowing you're going to be on the road for a month now, probably, I would guess, at least.
Certainly last year it was the start of the triple header. I must admit, I'm not sure if it is this time. I guess they're going on to Mexico
Brazil
on Monday or Tuesday. And then we used to go on to Brazil straight after that. And you just sort of put yourself in the mindset as you're going to be away, and that's what it is. I felt that I kind of almost had to disconnect myself from home life to make it doable, because I couldn't affect home life too much because I was going to be away for that duration. The positive side is these places tend to be the more interesting places. I always preferred the flyaway, the longer distance events to the European ones, just because they're a bit more varied and the places are more interesting to go to. Because you can't, the contrast between Austin and, say, Brazil is huge in terms of the environment and what you're dealing with. So you've got that. The hotels can be very nice, so that's positive. So it's a bit of a mixture, but it's the relentless thinking about anti-roll bars, front wings, downforce levels, ride heights. When you've been doing that for sort of 3-4 weeks, 5 weeks on the trot, it does start to get you a bit. I think it starts to drive you a bit bonkers.
I
depends how well you get on with the people in the team.
Yeah, I can imagine.
It makes a huge difference.
Mark, we saw Mercedes go surprisingly well in Singapore. Amazing. Surprised even themselves, I think. Well, for sure. What do you think the balance of power will be like in Austin this weekend? Have you got any feel for that?
I think it's going to be really interesting. I think what it looked like to me was that George's Mercedes looked to be the only car that had a nice front end and he was able to use that so he could brake later, accelerate earlier, because he could get his car rotated nicely. Whereas the McLarens in particular looked a bit sluggish. So the question is, though, that's a very particular type of track where most of the corners are very similar, apart from the last two onto the start-finish straight, and you're not going to lose an awful lot of time through there, potentially. I wonder how they're going to be able to accommodate this very different track in Austin, which has a much more demanding range of corner speeds and the weather conditions. So that's going to be really interesting. Similarly, I think McLaren, you would, based on earlier in the season, so we haven't had a convention. I would call this a more conventional racetrack in terms of the spread of corner types. And we haven't had one of those since Zandvoort, really. And that was in a phase where McLaren was still dominant, or not dominant, but they were still ahead, and it looked like Red Bull was starting to catch them up. So are we going to see a reversion to that sort of form order, with McLaren having an edge, Red Bull maybe closer than they were earlier in the season, and Mercedes maybe struggling a bit more? It's going to be very interesting to see how that all plays out, and whether the developments that the teams have made have closed that up in that intervening period.
Well, fascinating, I agree. And Max Verstappen, the Red Bull, looking as if they do have the downforce that we guessed about at Monza, but it looks to be real, so that shouldn't hurt them around Austin, that is for sure. The big question, I think, is Ferrari. How do you think Ferrari might go in Austin? But how long is that straight, really, in terms of other circuits and in your engineering mind?
It's not super long. I'd say it's pretty typical, but what pushes the simulations to, say, run a lowish downforce level at Austin is the fact there's a lot of high-speed corners where you don't need extra downforce according to the simulation. But what the simulation doesn't take into account is bumps around the lap and tyre degradation potentially. So that's why I said you sometimes have to run a bit more downforce than maybe these simulations suggest. The Ferrari's engine is, well, from my experience, the last 2 years, it is pretty powerful, so that will help them. But if they can't get a decent chassis balance, I think they're going to struggle, to be honest. I'm not sure this is going to be a good Ferrari track. But they're not looking strong anywhere these days, are they? I mean, you were making some comments about how they seem to have dulled the car down to make Lewis happier, but Charles less happy. And it's difficult to know what it actually is, but they haven't shown great pace for quite a while now. So I'm not overly hopeful for Ferrari. So
interesting to hear you say, though, that you think the Ferrari engine's got quite a lot of power. That's presumably from your experience at Haas. Tell us about that.
We would tend to be less competitive until qualifying, and then we would find that we were maybe a bit quicker than we expected. So,
well, that's a good point. I mean, what do they do to the engine for qualifying? Even for Q3, it appears, in the case of some teams.
Yeah, I mean, all the teams have different engine modes. So the engine manufacturers are very clever. They do lots of dyno testing, and they sort of set different levels, probably 3 or 4 different performance levels. I'd say mostly 3. And they run mileage tests in all those different modes. And basically, the less demanding you can be on an engine for the majority of the time, the harder you can push it for a limited period of time. And I think the steps in performance between the engines might be a little bit different between, say, the Renault unit in the Alpine up to the Ferrari. We always used to we did all of the qualifying in the highest mode, but whether there were other changes that the Ferrari engineers were able to make to boost the performance a little bit more later in qualifying, I don't know. I don't think so. And I'm sure Mercedes and Honda all have the same. But we just seem to find that come Saturday we would just have a little bit more performance than we kind of expected based on what we saw in P1 and P2, which was always a pleasure.
I can imagine. Mark, this is a very trivial question, but in Singapore, Leclerc banged into Lando Norris as they were both going out of the pit lane and damaged Lando's front wing, which obviously had to be replaced. I'm interested to know, can you put a number on how much that damage was worth, what that would have cost? Was that junk the whole wing, do you think? And was the €10,000 fine commensurate with the damage that was caused?
No. I mean, the chances are that the structural integrity of the wing would have been damaged to some extent, potentially. Where it mounts to the nose box, it could have been something. I mean, they wouldn't have had time to work it out. So the first, you'd have to just change it and then assess the damage to the, whether the wing was reusable after the event. But I mean, in the race, you saw Lando had that broken front wing end plate, but that would actually have done very little to the aerodynamic performance, because the end plates on the cars now they're by regulation, and they don't actually have any real or very little aerodynamic performance other than at the bottom root corner where they're attached to the main plane. You see some veins and stuff on there, but you can break off that top part of the end plate and it won't make much difference, unlike a few years ago where it would have had a dramatic difference. So it's difficult to say, but you would just change it because you'd be worried about the structural integrity. That would be why they'd have just done that.
Yeah, but how much would one of those front wings cost if you took in the man hours to build it, the design time, blah, blah, blah?
You're looking at tens of thousands of dollars, euros, pounds. So yeah, €2,000 is nothing close.
No, it was 10. They got a €10,000 fine.
10,000, yeah, that wouldn't cover it at all. I would have thought you're looking at. I'm kind of guessing here, but I think you're looking at 40,000, 50,000 for an assembly.
And the other final point, just before we get on
to some questions, was the problem that Williams had in Parc Fermé with the DRS on the rear wing. What can you identify with that?
Yeah, similar to issues we had at Haas in Monaco the year before. Basically, the FIA have a ball on the end of a wand that they pass through the gap between the main plane and the flap when it's in its static position, and then they'll ask to activate the flap and it'll open up and they'll measure the gap, and you're limited on how much you can open up, and the teams can adjust those gaps, and from one assembly to another there are going to be minor variations because you're creating an assembly out of lots of parts, so there's all tolerances built up in that, so you can get a little bit of variation. You have to adjust it out before you do the tests. And I imagine that somehow there's probably been some sort of communication error somewhere down the line, and the wings either haven't been set up as intended, someone's not been there, someone new to the job maybe, or they've got a new part and they've made a small error in the design, something like that. That's certainly what happened with us at Haas. We had a new wing, and the way you had to set it up was different than the previous wings, but the guys who were assembling wings didn't realise that, and so they'd done it the way that the other wings had been done, and it just came out to be very slightly incorrect. So it's a shame because it probably made negligible difference to performance, but rules is rules. So it's all part of the game, isn't it, unfortunately?
And a great recovery drive by Carlos Sainz into the points. Amazing drive, actually, by Carlos Sainz. Well, yeah, I mean, that's classic current TV situation, isn't it? Let's have a look at... Sorry, Mark, you're going to say something?
Coming up through the points. We didn't get to see that either.
No, we saw a few lovely bits of car control from Fernando when he was having fun. And he also snapped at his race engineer at one point, didn't he? And said something like, if you keep talking to me, I will turn off the radio or something. Is that normal, Fernando?
No, I would say not. But then the year I was working with him, he actually once complained that he felt lonely out on the track because I wasn't talking to him enough.
No pleasing, eh?
No, I think it's just an indication of how their mindset is at a particular moment. So you can't win as the race engineer. There's always going to be times that you didn't talk enough and times that you talk too much. But you've got to be a bit smart, haven't you? And if they're really on it in a critical phase, you do have to leave them alone unless it's something that's really important for them to know.
Mark, there's one other thing I've just got to get your input on, and I don't know if you saw it this way, but I'm going to put it this way to you. What did you think about McLaren asking Lando what they thought about Oscar's pit strategy and when he should come in, and could he give them permission, please, to change Oscar's? What did you think about that discussion with the driver about pit strategy?
I thought that was very odd, I have to say. I don't know what to say, really, because it strikes me that the mindset isn't quite right, and I think this is very dangerous for them. I think this could be how they lose the championship rather than Max winning it. Is if they've obviously set out to be very almost democratic in the way they work with the drivers and try to be as fair as possible. There will be, there's always a rule. Basically, the driver who's ahead, teams I work for, always has the advantage. If you say, you try to be, you give him the optimum. He's already ahead. He's earned that right to be given the advantageous pit call, because there's always going to be one that's better and one that's worse. And so somewhere down the line, someone has to lose out a little bit. But there's also the team at heart as well. And if the driver running behind is in danger of losing a place or would do better if he had a better strategy, sometimes you just have to make the call, even if it's slightly disadvantageous for the guy in front. But ultimately, that's a team call, and the guys in charge of the team have to decide and make those decisions. And I don't fully understand why you would confer with the driver ahead and give him the right to adjust that call. I find that a bit odd. It's obviously just the way they do things, but it just seems a little bit weak, doesn't it, from a team operation point of view? And I don't think that's healthy for the drivers, because I think it starts to sow doubts in their own minds, and you could get really churned up. You could really start. The drivers should be concentrating on the job in hand and not having these outside influences to concern themselves. So I think it's a little worrying. Maybe it was just an unusual set of circumstances, but there have been one or two things this year that have just slightly found a bit odd, the way they've talked to the drivers and the conversations they're having, and it just makes you feel that there's a bit of tension, a bit of worry there, and they're not as confident as they should be, really.
And if you were to think about your years at McLaren, say, and you were having that conversation with Mika or Kimi, I can't imagine how they would have reacted to that. They would have just said, make your own mind up, wouldn't they?
Yeah, Mika and Kimi were two drivers who didn't really want to do much talking anyway, so there was actually very little radio communication with them. You certainly, we would never have been in a position or ask a question like that to them. We might have had to tell them that we were going to do something that they didn't like, and they wouldn't have liked it. But that's what would have happened. And it might be someone's call that I didn't agree with, but you still do it because you have to. You might question it off the radio or necessarily not to the driver. But I think you have to have a hierarchy, and you have to have clear instructions, and you have to have the right aims in mind, and you have to do what's best for the team at the end of it until such time as you won the Constructors' Championship. And then you have to decide how you're going to play the game between two drivers competing for the Drivers' Championship, but make sure that you don't compromise your team position. McLaren 2007, this is starting to look a little bit like that, when Kimi managed to come through and win the championship in the Ferrari, when McLaren really should have had one of their two drivers winning it. So that there is a little, and we did make mistakes, definitely, with unclear, just decision making that wasn't necessarily entirely logical for the situation at hand. There were other factors that got in the way. So maybe we're seeing a little bit of that here. But I think it's more here. I think it's more to do with a certain level of a desire to appear to be as fair as possible that's almost getting a little bit out of hand, potentially.
Very diplomatically and well said, Mark. Now, let's have a look at some of the questions, which there are many questions here. And anyway, we'll just start from the top and then we'll see how we get on. I don't want to overstay our welcome with you, Mark, because I know you've got other things to get on with. But here's the first one. I'll read them out to you. This is from Sarosh Soman. Hi, Peter. Hi, Mark. Who do you think was the best in time management from the Pirelli era, 2011 onwards? The best driver of time management is a fairly all-embracing question. Difficult one to answer, I would have thought.
Yeah. I mean, I don't have enough information. As an engineer who works for a specific team, all I could say is that based on the recent information that you see with GPS data, so all the teams have access to GPS of the other cars through the weekends. Max is the gold standard for tyre management. So when I would be comparing what my guys were doing, the first driver I would pull up would be Max, and because he was top dollar. The next best in terms of management would be probably George Russell in recent times. Not as consistent as Max, but certainly sometimes you could see him do something and you'd think, that's interesting that he's doing that, and maybe Max wouldn't be doing it. So George was very good at it. Interestingly, I think Fernando is very good at it, but he knows not to demonstrate it at all times. So even in the practice sessions, he knows what he's going to do, but he doesn't necessarily do it in P2 on the long runs because he doesn't want to give his hand. He knows that everyone has access to the information. Going back in time, Kimi was phenomenal. Kimi was always good at looking after tyres, but that was just the way he drove the car. And sometimes that was to his downside, because if he didn't push the tyres hard enough, he wouldn't get performance out of them.
Very good. Good to hear. I'm not surprised. I mean, I would have said Max and George. George was always good in GP2, to the point where it annoyed all the other drivers, because he appeared to be driving the car pretty hard in terms of turn in the front end that you mentioned earlier, and yet his time management was just unbelievable. But I suspect that's because he's very good at keeping the car fairly square to the road and not overloading one corner at the expense of another.
The one guy I didn't mention was Lewis.
Yeah.
And that's because I think Lewis is just so instinctive and reactive. It's all just natural talent, and he knows how to look after tyres, but I don't think he's as necessarily focused on that. But he can drive tyres that are a bit more damaged. I think I mentioned this last time. He can drive them more quickly than other people just because of his natural ability. So his tyre deck can look better than another driver's, but his tyres aren't necessarily going to be in better condition. It's just the fact that he can drive them unbelievably well. Yeah. So it's a slightly different thing.
Yeah, a little bit like the difference between, say, Ronnie Peterson and Mario Andretti back in the Lotus development years. Colin would always say, Ronnie completely adaptive to the car, Mario much more able to be objective about the feel of the car. And it's interesting, and I've never really thought of Lewis that way, but I totally get your point about that. Okay, thank you very much for that one, Sarosh. Typically, you always have 4 or 5 at the beginning of the show, Sarosh. I don't know what time you get up to be in pole position for these, but another one from you. Peter Mark, 2014, Alonso adapted much better than Kimi to the new hybrid cars in the Ferrari, which was a surprise for me, Sarosh, considering how well Kimi drove for Lotus in 12 and 13. Any insights, please, on what was going on then?
I think tyres had something to do with that. Because we had if you remember, there were a load of tyre failures at Silverstone in 2013, and the tyres got changed late 13, and Kimi's qualifying struggled after that. And then combining, I suspect the tyres were similar going into 14. Then you've got the new engines, and they did away with some of the suspension trickery that we had in the cars in 12 and 13, which I know Kimi really liked, the way the cars rode very well, and he was able to make use of that in his driving, whereas we went to much more basic, stiffer cars for 14. The handling characteristics were less good. and maybe that in combination with the tyres just meant that he was struggling with his style of driving. It would be my guess. This is all supposition, but Kimi got on very well with the Lotus Renault, whatever you want to call it, in 12 and 13, and it was a car that had a particular. It had an unbelievably good ride, and it was ideal for his driving style, the very minimal steering inputs. Until they came up with the front tyres with a stronger construction that had less front end. This was the sort of where they started to have this problem with the front end lateral grip and the Pirellis. And I think Kimi had out-qualified Romain in every race up until the point where they introduced the new tyre construction. And I'm not sure if he out-qualified him again to the end of the season. So there was a distinct change in the qualifying competitiveness of the two drivers. But Kimi still finished ahead of Romain in most of the races. But yeah, so I think it's just a combination of features, and honestly, Kimi he had become a bit less adaptable, I think, in his driving over the years, and so when the things didn't work well for him, I think he found it difficult to adapt. Whereas Fernando, he just wants a car that understeers, actually. That's very important, I think. Fernando likes an understeery car, so the tyres having less front end in some ways actually would have worked for him. If you remember with the Renault of 2005, 2006, that actually had a very strong front end, but Fernando used to oversteer, so he would turn the wheel too much. So he would actually go over the peak of the front tyre grip. You'd see him turning into the last corner in Hungary with an incredible amount of lock on the car, and he'd deliberately go over the peak of the tyre, and then he'd actually unwind the steering back as he approached the mid-corner to get the front grip to pick up. It's a remarkable style of driving he had at that point, but it worked well. But the reason he was doing it was to get rid of the instability of the car. And that was part of the problem he had, then adapting to the Bridgestones in 7 and 8, particularly in 2007, because they weren't like that. They gave a stronger front end in the mid corner, so he had to undo his driving style, which Lewis didn't have to do going from GP2 at the time. So yeah, I think it's to do with the tyres and the suspension changes that came in, rather than probably the engine change at that time.
Yeah, interesting point. And when Fernando was on groove tyres, he was always better at managing graining or preventing graining, prolonging the life of the tyre, if you like, than, say, Jarno Trulli. And probably from what you just said, that's because of the way he would, if in effect, he would take out some of the instability by that quite aggressive initial turn-in, whereas Jarno was always very, very soft and subtle with his inputs. And maybe that made a big difference on the groove tyre era.
Well, in the groove tyre era, one of the important things was to actually get through the graining phase. So the tyres knew to have lots of grip, then they would grain the edges of the blocks, and you'd have lots of understeer, and then the tyre would wear more and the graining would get worn down and the grip would come back. So if you drove very aggressively with the front, which I think Fernando could do, you'd actually get through that graining phase more quickly. And it was something that the Pirelli guys and we learned that you had to try to do. Sometimes you tell the driver to push harder with the fronts to actually get through the graining phase. And I think Fernando was probably able to do that better with his style. Because he could wind the lock on and basically just wear the blocks down quickly once they started to go, and then you get into that second phase of grip more quickly, potentially. Again, speculation, but knowing the way he drove the car, I think that's a possibility. Whereas for Kimi, he would not want to put more steering in the car. So when the tyres grained, he found it he would actually stay in that phase for longer, potentially, which would be a problem.
Yeah, well, don't we miss it? Those groove tyres, the narrow track, Max Mosley's whole recipe for Formula One. We don't talk about it at all. We try to forget it as quickly as possible, I think, don't we? Terrible.
It was interesting, but yeah, there's a bit of a dead end, I think. in many ways.
I think Max's original premise was we're going to bring Formula One much closer to the everyday road car with treaded tyres, narrow track. It didn't really have any impact whatsoever. It just annoyed a lot of people, as far as I can make out.
Yeah. Well, one of the funny things was the first year we had 3 grooves in the front tyres, and I think we had 4 grooves in the rear tyres. And then for 99, when we went, Michelin left the scene, and it was just a 1-tyre formula for 99 with Bridgestone, and they introduced a 4th groove on the front tyre, and all the vehicle dynamics guys said, "Oh shit, we're going to have loads less front grip because of this change to the tyres. So we need to design the cars to get rid of understeer." What they didn't know was that Bridgestone, had changed the carcasses of the tyres to make them much cheaper to make. And the effect of that was to actually make the rear tyres much less good. So we went to the first test with the car set up to deal with understeer. And what did we have? We had horrendous instability from the rear, and we had to undo everything that we'd done to deal with the extra grooves in the front, because actually, no, what we had was just much less grip, and we had less rear grip than we had front grip. It was terrible. But yeah, big change.
Yeah, they were the days. Bridgestone, Michelin. Yeah, right. Anyway, Sarosh, another one. That'll be your third, Sarosh. But anyway, good question. Peter Mark, the Austin track doesn't give me the same feeling as Turkey or Sepang. Those were more enjoyable to look at as a viewer. Your views, please. If I can just quickly answer that by saying, yeah, they did try to adopt lots of characteristics of other circuits into the design of Austin. And we've talked about how the S's in theory sort of match Suzuka. And then I think going into the hairpin, I think Michael designed that very wide entry, or said, I want a really wide entry into the hairpin for this circuit. They consulted Michael and to improve overtaking, and it kind of works. But I guess that's a little bit the hairpin of Suzuka as well. But then you've got that long triple apex right-hander towards the end of the lap, which is supposed to echo Turkey. But of course, the difference in Turkey, a little bit like that fast entry to the S's, is that after that long corner at Turkey, there's a long straight, downhill straight, which rewarded how well you went through that corner. Whereas in Austin, you think, wow, yeah, it's really good through this right-hander. And then he's almost on the brakes again as he's coming out, which again nullifies the beauty of that corner. I don't know whether you would agree with that, Mark. They tried to do stuff, but none of it's really worked.
Because they haven't got long straights afterwards.
I completely agree. The corners themselves are only part of the story, aren't they? It's what comes before them and what comes after them that matter. And if you don't have that as a nice logical flow, it just doesn't work. And I would agree that it is a very demanding track to set the car up. It's a very technical, it's quite a difficult challenge, but I would agree that from a racing point of view, it doesn't hold in terms of either viewing or I mean, I loved Suzuka. It was a very difficult track to set the car up for, but somehow you felt, when you got a car working well around Suzuka, you felt just a massive sense of achievement. Same for Brazil, but somehow Austin, it just doesn't quite, it doesn't grab you in the same way. And yeah, it's a bit of a shame.
What about Malaysia? He mentioned Malaysia. What did you think about Malaysia?
Again, a very difficult track to set the car up for, but it was, again, it didn't, I said the feeling is more Austin than Suzuka for some reason for me. It just felt like a concoction of different types of corners, but it didn't feel like it had a flow to it that those other tracks somehow managed to have. Even Interlagos not being the original circuit, it somehow still poses a great challenge that seems to work and click. But these newer tracks, somehow they just don't seem to connect. I mean, Turkey was an odd one because that corner, the long left-hander, I mean, the reason that was so hairy was because it had a little bit of banking and it had bumps on the entry. And so it was somewhat terrifying. And Austin doesn't have that at all. Those corners aren't bumpy. I know there are bumps around the track, but those corners aren't particularly bumpy, and it just doesn't have the same scare factor as that corner in Turkey had. Maybe because the cars just have a lot more downforce now. So maybe if we went back to Turkey again, I know we did that in the COVID year, didn't we? And in actual fact, that corner didn't seem to be the challenge in 2020 that it had been back in 2005, unfortunately.
Interesting.
Yeah, downforce. Get rid of it. As Chris Amon said, get rid of all the aerodynamics on the cars. That's the only way forward.
Well, one of the reasons why we have big front wings is because of advertising. It's why it's the amount of advertising area on the cars is a factor in the discussions about the regulations. And because the first thing you should do if you want to make the cars less sensitive is just limit the size of the front wings, because that everything else follows from that. If you limit the size of the front wing down to something much smaller, you just can't have a lot of downforce anymore, because you can't balance it. So but I think that they really didn't want to reduce the front wing area because of the space that you can sell.
Yeah, I'm sure you're right there.
Money, unbelievable, isn't it? They put money as a priority in Formula One. I just can't get my head around that. Yeah, right. Aaron, Peter, do you think a number 2 driver can be effective for a team even if they aren't willing to be number 2 because their ambitions are higher than that? Wouldn't this create tension and distract from overall team performance? For example, Daniel at McLaren. Well, I mean, I'll obviously hand that over to Mark, but I think from my perspective, and having watched Formula One for quite a long time, no team really designates, not in modern times, a driver as a number 2 driver. No car is designated as a number 2 car. Both cars are equally well prepared, and you try within limits to sign the best drivers you've got. But if you've got a star driver, if you've got a Michael Schumacher or a George Russell or a Charles Leclerc or a Lewis Hamilton or a Max Verstappen, you don't really want to mix those drivers with one another. You want another driver who's capable of winning, gives good feedback, will do all the sponsorship events that the number 1 guy doesn't want to do, and fits in comfortably with the team. And a few of those we've seen. Valtteri Bottas is a good example. Sergio Perez, to some extent, bearing money, brought a lot of money to the team as well. Very good counterpoint to Max Verstappen. But if you put Charles Leclerc alongside Max, I'm not sure you'd get the best from Max. I don't know what you think about that. You've worked with a lot of good drivers and seen the other side of the garage, Mark,
as well.
Yeah, it is one of the hardest things to achieve, isn't it? The right balance. I agree with what you've said, and I guess the closest maybe we got to it was potentially Rubens or Eddie Irvine at Ferrari alongside Michael, where they were both very fast drivers, obviously capable of setting a car up well. They seemed to work well as a team, but it was pretty clear that Michael had, called the shots in terms of all was given preference, and those other 2 drivers were happy with it for a period of time until it got to the point where they couldn't deal with it anymore. I suspect pay packet size had a big part to do with how long they were able to endure that position. But you can't just have someone in the number 2 car who's not a competitor, because they won't drive the car fast enough. You won't learn enough about the car, and if the lead guy has a bad weekend and something happens, they won't be there to pick up the pieces. So it's really important to manage it. And I think it tried to manage it at McLaren by, you'd say it's free between the 2 drivers up to a certain point in the season. When you've got to the point where it's pretty clear that one driver of the 2 is going to be the championship challenger, then you have to favour that guy. And if you don't do that, you are likely not to succeed. See McLaren 2007 for details, whereas in other seasons there was a bit more of that. So 2005, when Juan Pablo Montoya had sort of taken himself out early in the season with his tennis accident on the motorbike, then it was fairly clear at a certain point that you had to favour Kimi. Maybe it didn't happen quite as much as it should have done. That's a matter of opinion. So you've got to make decisions, but again, it's a bit like what we were talking about earlier. It comes with the McLaren conversations on the radio. You've got to have clear management, but you've got to have spoken to the drivers beforehand. They've got to understand the rules and be part of it, and happily part of it. if you can't get the drivers on board with what you're trying to achieve, then you're going to have problems. But no, you can't have a clear number 2 driver who's not on the pace, and having a number 2 driver who is on the pace is almost impossible to achieve, isn't it? So it's a tricky situation.
Yeah, Niki Lauda, Clay Regazzoni at Ferrari was a very good. Alan Jones, Clay Regazzoni, and anybody was very good, actually, to be honest. There have been a lot of very good number 2s over the years, lots. But they've all been, as you say, capable of doing their thing in their own right. And they've all been very competitive and able to win races. Yeah. Anyway, moving on to Jez. WCR Movies. Hi, Mark and Peter. Hope you're well. I love Mark joining you, Peter. I hope it becomes a regular thing. Well, the moment I'm about to say to Mark, you've been on the show for an hour, mate. Please, I know you got to feed the dog and do various other really critical things. No, I'm being facetious. But are you okay for a few more minutes? How you place for time? Just a few more minutes. Okay, this is a question, I think, Mark. In 2005, how hard was it with the car unreliability? Did it change how Kimi and you operated? Unreliability we're talking about.
Yeah, I mean, it did change how we operated, because after the first 4 or 5 races, we were way behind. We were out of the picture mostly because of unreliability. There were a couple of other factors as well. So the mindset became, we've got to win every race from this point onwards. And so we started approaching the races with a slightly more aggressive qualifying approach than we might have done if we'd been competitive on points in the championship. And in the races, I mean, where it came unstuck for us famously was the Nürburgring, when we had that bad flat spot. And if we had been closer to Fernando in the championship, because reliability early in the season had been better, we probably would have stopped him sooner and changed that tyre and finished second, rather than taking the risk of going to the end of the race on that tyre and trying to win it. It was a bit self-defeating, because it made us take risks that probably didn't help us. But unreliability was almost a part of the game back then, unfortunately. And you went into most races not knowing if you were going to finish. And so your heart was in your mouth most of the time. Whereas I think now, when a car doesn't finish, it's a real shock. And there seems to be this massive post-mortem in the press about why a car didn't finish a race, which, just wasn't a thing back then. And where Renault were very impressive was that they did nail reliability. I think they took a much more pragmatic approach. And I guess Ferrari, to some extent, were a bit more like that as well. They had more processes in place to build more reliable cars. And maybe that was a failing on our part of McLaren, that we hadn't got our heads around it as much. But yeah, I think that was the thing. We knew we had to win every race. And if you look back at that time, I mean, Kimi was generally a lot faster than Fernando, and even quite a bit faster than Juan Pablo most of the time. So we should have been able to do it, but the reliability, both from a component failure and a preparation point of view, was what did us in the end, I'm afraid. And part of that, the reason why we were quicker was we were pushing the engine too hard. In hindsight, those things that I said earlier about how the engine manufacturers do mileage different engine modes and set the performance of their engines, we weren't doing that back then. And what we were doing was pushing the engine too hard for too long, and it couldn't take it. What we should have learned sooner to do was how to back it off when we didn't need it. And from the next year onwards, Mercedes did do a big program into that. And actually went from being not good at it to better at it than the other teams, and which was what led to. I mean, if you look at the Mercedes engine of 2006, it was appalling, but that same engine in 2007, 2008 was phenomenal, and it was a really impressive turnaround. I just wish it had occurred 3 or 4 years earlier.
Who was running Mercedes powertrains then? Was it Andy Cowell back then, even then?
Andy, I'm trying to remember. No, because he was at BMW, wasn't he? I think Andy came in a bit later. What happened was Cosworth ended Formula One involvement with the V10s, and some of the guys that had been at Cosworth moved over to Mercedes and brought with them some different ways of working. And some of the people who had been more involved in deciding things at Mercedes got moved sideways at that time, and it had a big effect on how we went racing. I mean, also there was the race to 20,000 RPM in 2006 between Cosworth, BMW, and Mercedes, and I think Cosworth might have got there first actually, but it was a mistake, because high revving engines produce a lot of friction and heat. And the FIA actually introduced I think it was an 18,000 RPM rev limit for 2007. And that was actually a good thing, because it meant that pushing the revs as high as possible was no longer the objective. I remember Mercedes getting very excited when we did a qualifying lap with 20,000 RPM upshifts. And it was pointless. It didn't achieve anything. The engine was poor. We had incredibly high fuel consumption and very poor heat rejection, which meant we had to run the cooling levels very open, in the races, and that hurt the downforce. And it was just a mistake to go down that route at that time.
And what was the decibel level at that point? 20,000.
It was. Those V8 engines were pretty unpleasant to deal with. They were worse than the V10s, although not as bad as the very heavily rev-restricted V8s that they ran in GP2 and F2. They were the absolute worst engines to hear. When those cars were on track and you were in the garage, it was a nightmare. But yeah, 20,000 RPM. It was an engineering achievement, but somewhat futile at that time.
I'm going to do a different thing now, folks, and scroll to the bottom of the thing on the basis that there'll be probably quite a lot of questions based on what we've been talking about. I need some skooma 420 says, agreed, Carlos Sainz at Ferrari perfectly fitted the description of the second driver in this discussion. Well, yeah, he did, didn't he? I mean, he was. Why did they change that? Charles Leclerc, Carlos Sainz, all they needed was a decent car, and there's your championship-winning team.
It's funny, because when Carlos was at Renault with Nico, it was a fantastic team as well. I think Carlos would disagree about being a fantastic number 2 driver, because he obviously wants to be the winning driver, and I think he's a slow burner. I think he in the right circumstances, could be the contender, because he's got certain qualities that maybe Charles doesn't have. But he's just a good guy to have. I mean, they went for. If you're offered Lewis, he's an unbelievably talented guy. I guess there's a huge marketing thing behind him as well. I mean, I did hear some stories that it was a decision that was made by Ferrari's marketing division. I heard a story, again, maybe apocryphal, that Ferrari's brand makes as much money for them as the selling of road cars. And this was a relatively new phenomenon, and they were heavily involved in the decision to push for Lewis to join the team, because from that point of view, it was going to be a much better proposition than the one they had at the time. So there you go. But don't get me wrong, I'm a massive fan of Lewis as a driver. He is absolutely phenomenal. But I do think in terms of disrupting the team and costing them competitiveness, it does seem to have played out badly, doesn't it?
It does. And I made the point a few times that, again, there's nothing like a great racing car that wouldn't have made Charles Leclerc and Carlos Sainz a championship-winning team, and Lewis was not the answer to that particular problem. He was never going to be able to bring development skills and experience as a driver to transform the technology behind Ferrari. And they had, yeah. But there's an interesting point. I'm interested to get your input on this. I mean, they were in quite serious discussions and went quite far down the road for the second time in hiring Adrian Newey. And assuming they'd hired Adrian, and Adrian was at Ferrari now and had been there for the last 9 months, how do you think things would be going? And how do you rate Adrian anyway?
Adrian is the only person I've ever worked with I would describe as a genius. It's as simple as that. He is another level in his approach. He's unbelievably competitive as an individual, but his mind works in a way that I've not come across anyone like him. I mean, it's a bit of a silly thing to say in some ways, but he can see, he understands airflow in a way that it's a natural thing to him. He just knows what he's looking for, and he knows how to get there. Not everything he does is right by any stretch of imagination, but he's just got a better hit rate by some margin than anyone else. Him going to Ferrari, it wouldn't have just been him. It would have been him and 30 other people. I think this is where it went wrong. I think if they wanted Adrian at Ferrari, I suspect Adrian said, well, it's me and all these other people that you have to take. And I think that's where it would have fallen down, because they couldn't have accepted that. But he's not stupid. He knows that whilst I'm sure he thinks he's the greatest designer of all time as well. Don't get me wrong, he's got a certain amount of ego as well. But he knows that he needs people around him who work well with him, which he has always had. And until latterly at Red Bull, I suspect that there were a few people who were leaving Red Bull, weren't there? And I suspect he knew that those people going was going to harm his position within the team, and that's one of the reasons he probably chose to leave. But yeah, he knows that he needs a team of people around him who are on board with him and how he operates and can put his ideas and requirements into effect. And without that, it wasn't going to work. So because that's how it ended at McLaren. He left McLaren because the team was no longer working with him. And it was a terrible mistake on their part to allow that to happen. And he's not necessarily the easiest person to work with. He's very, very demanding. But ultimately, if you get on board with Adrian and give him what he needs, he'll deliver the goods. He always has done. So I suspect that's where it fell down. I suspect Ferrari weren't willing to go as far as he wanted to in terms of changing their organisation.
Well, let me ask you this then. If Ferrari had done that, and there is an argument for saying Freddie Vasseur, with his racing experience, should really have created that situation. If Ferrari had created an Adrian Newey plus 30 engineering department, and they'd kept Carlos Sainz because they didn't go down the Lewis route, where do you think Ferrari would be now?
Well, it depends when he would have moved there. I mean, for instance, when he came to McLaren in 97, he absolutely refused to work on the 97 car. He point blank said, this is nothing to do with me. I want nothing to do with it. I want to concentrate totally on 98. So if Adrian had joined at the end of last year or midway through last year, the current car, I suspect, wouldn't have been much better than it is now, because he would have refused to be involved with it. But where they would have been next year would be hugely better. And inevitably some of what he was doing may have fed through into the current car and improved it a bit. But it's all about the long term. You've got to build for the long term. You can't. It's difficult. It is all part of the balancing act for these teams. But I'm pretty confident that Adrian and a crew of people who work with him would have produced the best car down the line. And the question is whether at Aston Martin he's got the crowd of people around him that he needs to produce the best car. If he does, then Aston Martin should be very excited about the future, I would say.
And then the other question is, if if that was the case at Ferrari, and they were going to win races and championships from 26 onwards, would the amount of money that comes with winning races and championships and the kudos be greater than the amount of money that they gained by signing Lewis Hamilton as a marketing thing? That's the other interesting balancing act.
That is the balancing act, and I don't know the answer to that, because I suspect it would be slightly better, but obviously the best thing to have would be to have both of them.
Yeah.
And to be fair, I think you could do that, because I think what you have without Adrian, you need drivers who can help steer the direction of the team. With Adrian, potentially, Adrian is very good at working with drivers. That's another aspect that I'm not sure how well known he is. He's very, very good at working with drivers and understanding what drivers need. He's not just an aero genius. He understands all aspects of the car performance, and he knows enough about driving, and he relates very well with drivers. And Mika absolutely loved Adrian. That was it relit Mika's spark when Adrian joined McLaren. And I suspect he has that relationship with other drivers as well. So I can imagine Adrian working very well with Lewis, to be honest. So in many ways, you could have had the best of both worlds, potentially. Whereas I think with the team that Ferrari have potentially now, or any other team, having a stable, constructive, good feedback driver partnership is more important. Sticking with the stable partnership of Charles and Carlos might have been beneficial for moving things forwards and not dividing the team.
Yep. Well, we can talk about that one forevermore, and I'm sure they will in the pubs of England forevermore, and everywhere else for that matter. TB7530 says Suzuka's a top circuit. Yeah, I think we all agree with that one, definitely. Here's one from the same viewer. How high compared to other bests, BSTS, would you rate Kimi from 2003 to 2005? And why did he fall off afterwards? Was it the change in the cars, tyres, or changes in his motivation?
Well, obviously I didn't work with him at Ferrari, so it's difficult for me to say. I mean, I think in that period, 2002 to 2006, I think he was absolutely right up there. What would have been very interesting was to put him and Fernando in the same car, because I'm not sure who would have been better at that time. I think Kimi might have had the advantage. Depends on the car. If you put Kimi in a Renault, no, Fernando probably quicker. Put Fernando in the McLaren of 2005, Kimi probably still quicker. So it depends on the style. But we kind of covered this before, didn't we?
Yeah.
I think it was to do with I suspect the Ferrari didn't drive the way the McLaren did. I know for a fact that they did do some things that we had been doing, and that was one of the reasons he was happier. Even though he won the first race of 2007, I think he was more effective in the latter part of the season, and I believe that they did introduce some of the things that we had on the car, particularly crossway with steer, and that improved his performance latter part 2007. Why then 2008, 2009 he didn't carry on, I don't know. It's impossible to say. I think Kimi enjoyed being a Ferrari driver. From discussion with Mark Arnold, the guy, his trainer who went with him, he was more than a trainer. But I think there was a certain amount of politics inevitably in Ferrari that maybe Kimi didn't get on with. I don't know. I mean, some of it was, I think Felipe Massa was just very fast. And so Kimi struggled to beat him in qualifying. I think he was probably the better race driver still. But I think Felipe was very, very quick and felt very comfortable in the team at that time. So, difficult to say.
One driver we haven't talked about very much from your perspective, Mark, is Michael Schumacher. You did work with him briefly, I think. Yeah. What are your thoughts on Michael if you compare him with Fernando, Kimi at their peak? Where do you see Michael in your mind?
Yeah, I mean, I suppose I should have. Michael did compete for the championship in 2006, didn't he? I mean, the Michael I worked with, I don't think was at the level he had been before his motorbike accident after he retired. So I find it very difficult to make those comparisons. I mean, the Michael that Mika and Kimi and Fernando competed against was absolutely up there. I still think Mika and potentially Kimi and Fernando were actually quicker, potentially on a lap. But I think Michael's overall determination, commitment, training schedule, Michael was the complete driver. A bit like Niki Lauda was in the sort of 70s and early 80s, in that Michael knew how to extract the most performance from himself and knew how to play the game better than anyone else. I think Fernando is a very clever guy on track in terms of racecraft. Kimi was never one to play games, in my opinion, like that. And certainly not within the team. Kimi just had complete belief in himself, but when he wouldn't try to play games within the team, in my opinion. So, but you could say that's a little bit of a weakness. So they're all different, and it's impossible to really compare them. But I still think on his day in, say, 2005, I would have Kimi down to beat the lot of them. Whereas earlier in the careers, I'd say Michael, and then latterly Fernando, probably slightly better on their days. So they're all on level. It's impossible to compare them directly, isn't it?
It is, of course, but it's great fun doing it. Mark, what was it like being on the pit wall at Spa when Mika pulled off that amazing pass against Michael with Riccardo Zonta going into Les Combes? Did you have a really good picture on your monitor of what was going on? And were you giving him any radio at that point?
No. We were just all holding our breath. What no one knew about at that time was that we expected the engine to fail.
Really?
Because there was an auxiliary oil tank on the car, and there was like a little flap valve that sort of, it opened and closed at a certain frequency to allow oil from this auxiliary oil tank through to the engine. And someone had set that frequency incorrectly before the race, and it was actually set at a frequency that was so high the oil couldn't actually get out of the tank to the engine. And the feeling was that because of Eau Rouge, the compression at Eau Rouge, the amount of oil that was in the main oil tank wasn't enough to get to. We expected that towards the last part of the race, basically the engine was going to suffer probably a big end bearing failure. So I actually almost passed out when he crossed the line because the tension was so high that I think a lot of our focus was on fretting about that as much as the amazing performance on the track. That was just unbelievable. The other thing that was strange about that weekend was that Mika hadn't been very happy about the car early in the weekend, but we changed the front wing flap. We changed the front wing assembly, and we put on an assembly that, for whatever reason, he was happier with the car, and we were able to run the flap angle lower than DC was managing to do, and yet the data said that we had the same amount of front end performance, and that meant that Mika's car was much more stable on the entries than David's, and it just worked an absolute treat. The car was absolutely fantastic from Saturday morning onwards. But that wing got damaged by Michael. When Michael pulled, Mika had attempted to overtake him into the same corner prior to coming across Riccardo Zonta, and the wing got damaged in that touch. And afterwards, when the wing went back to the factory, that particular assembly, it was chucked away. It was the damage was considered too much. But this was before anyone on the race team had a chance to say anything to anybody about that wing. So we got back and said, that front wing, there was something odd about the way it worked. We need to look at it. We need to check it over and see what about it is that made it so good, geometrically or whatever. And it was like, no, we can't do that. We've already bandsawed it up. And it was like, oh my God, can't believe we've done that. So we never knew what was so great about that front wing. because it got thrown away.
Well, Ron missed a trick there, didn't he? Because apart from anything else, that wing on eBay today would be worth billions, I would have thought. But anyway, wow, what a story. Is that what they did? They actually, when parts had to be thrown out at McLaren, they were sawn up and destroyed before they weren't just put in a big bin outside.
Yeah. Things just take up too much space if you don't smash them up.
Huh. Wow.
I think it's fairly common practice for things to either get. I remember someone with a big sledgehammer smashing a load of bodywork and floors and stuff up at McLaren in a skip out the back of the factory to make space for new parts. Yeah. Pretty brutal.
I probably shouldn't admit this, but after the British Grand Prix, the famous one when Nigel had a guy sit on the side pod on his slowdown lap in 92, I think, and the guy fell off and broke his leg. And I think the Daily Mirror interviewed him the next day, and he said, it was an honour to have my leg broken by Nigel Mansell. Anyway, that side pod, similar thing. I was in the factory Monday night, and there it was in the skip out the back. So guess where that side pod is now? You know, you don't let things like that go. With a big crack in it, of course. But race teams don't tend to think about history, do they? They just bang, bang, bang. Honda the same. I mean, Honda, all those lovely little Formula 2 engines that Jack Brabham and Denny Hulme had in 66 when they were dominating the new 2-litre, it was 2-litre or 1600 Formula 2 with that Honda engine. When that was all over, they were all dumped in the South China Sea. That's what Honda did. Such a shame. Such a shame. Right, let's just get a few more, Mark, and then I think we'll both go, to be honest. Lots of thank you marks. So I just want to pass those on to you, Mark. Really, really, I hope you enjoy doing something like this, do you? Because you probably, you know, I feel a little bit nervous about asking you things that you've probably spoken about a lot, but at the same time, you know, it's wonderful to get your input. So let's have a look. This is kind of echoing what you've said already, I think, but we'll just read it out. It's from Zubozon. McLaren's attempts at appearing fair have won a bit thin. It seems quite blatant to me that they favour Norris, or at least Zach does. Is that your reading? That actually
they do favour Lando now?
I'm not convinced about that. I think it's more that they're just trying desperately to be fair.
Yeah.
And depending on what they've said to the drivers before the race or before even going to an event, that kind of leads them to say certain things on the radio, or to approach things in a certain way. So they probably have said the lead driver has the advantage. But if they probably said, you know, but if there's a situation that means we want to give that advantage to the other guy to better the team's overall position, we will do that with your agreement on the basis that your position isn't threatened and stuff like that, you know. And you can just tie yourself in knots because there's always, yeah, but what if this or what if that? And then you go, oh, yeah, okay, we need to think about that aspect. It becomes politics, doesn't it?
Well, it does.
And of course, the overriding thing is, I presume, if you're near one another at the first corner, don't touch one another. That is for sure. And yet they did. And therefore, from Oscar's point of view, he might have thought, well, all bets are off in many ways because Lando's just basically broken the agreement we had about the first corner, which is the most serious one.
It depends what the agreement was. I mean, I have no idea what agreement there may or may have been. What I would say is from a personal point of view, it didn't seem like that big a deal to me, what happened. It's kind of a racing incident. What was more concerning for me was that it looked like Oscar he reacted badly to the situation and he seemed to, it's difficult to say, you don't know what he's dealing with in his car, but it wasn't the drive after that I expected. I expected him to fight back. And it didn't seem to happen, but maybe there were other issues that meant that he couldn't. But I just think...
Well, there was that...
I mean, as a race engineer, I'd be interested to get your input on this too. There was that Tom Stallard radio mention towards the end of the race when he said to Oscar... I guess what he was trying to do was get Oscar fired up. And he just said, look, you know, we're approaching the safety car window now. If it comes up, would you want to come in for softs? And Oscar just said... I don't know, mate. The way things have gone, do whatever you want. which was not the response you'd want as a race engineer, right?
Not at all. It's quite concerning that he seemed that downcast by what had occurred, given that he's still got a hefty advantage in the Drivers' Championship and the prospect, he should win it based on the current position. That's not to say he will, but he's got the advantage. And he needs to be thinking about every possible aspect that will improve his position in all circumstances. And he should be fired up and alert to that. I mean, I've had those conversations with drivers when their positions have clearly been hopeless, and you get that message back going, seriously, I don't really care what you do because I can't score a point. And you kind of think, yeah, I can see that, but I kind of have to say it. But when you're not in that, when you are in the position of very much still being in contention, I mean, he was catching both of the cars ahead of him, wasn't he?
Yeah,
he was catching towards the end.
Yeah, because Max was going slower and slower, really.
Exactly, yeah. So who knows what would have happened? So a mistake from either one of those could have changed the race dramatically, or a reliability issue, unlikely as it is. So I did find all that a little bit strange, but I think they're almost talking themselves out of winning a championship if they're not careful.
Well,
I'm sure Zach's got a master plan there somewhere that we're going to be seeing sooner or later.
I think they've done a fantastic job. I like that McLaren are back on top. I think it's a team that deserves to win. I think their approach to the engineering side of things in particular is very strong. They've turned around from the sort of 2014-15 when they were in dire straits, and I think that's good to see. But I think being in a championship contending position is kind of a new thing for them, and it's almost like they're a little bit inexperienced in how to deal with it. Whereas Red Bull have been dealing with championships for years, Mercedes has been dealing with championships for years, maybe not so much the last 2 or 3 years. So it's almost like Red Bull have a maturity in dealing with the championship that McLaren are struggling a little bit with, in terms of being put in that position. So, yeah.
Yep, well, I think that's absolutely right. Definitely interesting to see how they move forward from here. Shouldn't there be an end of season for a race? But it's a good one to end on, I think, Mark, because you've been incredibly generous with your time. This is from Arian Srivastav, 2412. Should there be an end of season informal race where all the drivers are racing the same car? And if so, who do you think the top 3 would be? I believe this would be a great promotional gimmick for Formula One. Not sure as engineers you like those sort of
hypothetical things, do you? I don't know. Do you ever think about things like that?
I think it would be an awful thing to do.
Yeah.
Well,
you're an engineer, aren't you? You love that combination of the car and the driver.
There's nothing in that for me. Who would care? I don't think anyone would care. Yeah, I don't mean to be mean, but I just think, I suppose it'd be interesting to see who would come out. But, different cars, the drivers have developed their cars. It's part of the thing, isn't it? A driver isn't a driver.
Of course, and
it depends what he means by the same car. Does he mean the same type of standard Formula One car, GP2 car, saloon car, road car? What is it? You've got to...
Do you set them all up to be exactly the same? I mean, some drivers are going to prefer a car and others are not going to prefer a car. But they wouldn't have arrived at that car if they'd been given a free hand. It's just not. It's not a comparison I want to see, to be honest. Remember the old the rally sprint they used to have on BBC back in the late early 80s. It's kind of pointless. I guess they got paid quite a bit of money, the people who took part. But
well, it wasn't completely pointless from my point of view, because I was very close to Nigel at that point, and I managed to wangle him into 3 in a row, I think he did.
Okay.
And in every occasion, even though he was right at the beginning of his career, he proved to be really good on the rally stage, let alone the auto test parking thing or the race. And I just thought, I'm not sure it did anything for his career, but it definitely showed that Nigel had talent that not many people had recognised at that point. And there's another interesting one they did in '84, that race at the Nürburgring
With Senna.
Yeah, well, it was a 190E Cosworth Mercedes, wasn't it?
Yeah.
And both Senna and Prost, I think Senna was on pole and Prost won the race from memory. It was something like that. But both of them were there. I mean, it was interesting that it brought those two to the surface. But also interesting that Carlos Reutemann qualified second. And he'd retired for a year by then. 2 years into retirement. Shows how good Carlos was. So I actually quite like those things. But then again, we have the Race of Champions these days, which is a lot of fun. But does it mean a lot? That's the question.
Yeah. I don't know. I'm a Formula One geek.
Yeah.
In the whole thing. So if you take a bit of it and have that as a competition, personally, I'm not that interested because I don't think it means that much. It's, for me, the interest is in the package. It's how the team, the driver, how it all comes together. And I know how unbelievably difficult it is to get that to come together for one race, let alone a whole championship. So that for me is the excitement of it all and the interest of it all. So sorry, I don't mean to be negative. It's not my bag.
Well, that's what these live streams are all about as well. People expressing their ideas and great to have your reaction. And great note on which to end it, I think. The right combination of car, driver, tyres, ride height, everything else, managing of crosswinds, tailwinds, headwinds that we're going to see in Austin this weekend. Thanks so much, Mark, for all that. And
we'll come back to you next week, if we may, to get your reflections on what we actually do see in Austin. Thanks so much for having us. All the best.
Okay. Thank you very much. Cheers.
So there's
Mark Slade. What a great guy, and what a great overload of input going into Austin. So much to think about. So some complaints about the sound. Well, it's not perfect. I still haven't got it absolutely perfect, but we're getting there, aren't we, in terms of that? Believe me, it's not easy. It's not as easy as it looks just to have a live guest on a show. Easy to record, to get it live and get it right, slightly difficult. But anyway, we're getting there. So keep the faith, and we will go forward. Another question from, where's this from? Eric Heidemann. 8035. Which driver is able to adjust best to changing circumstances on the track? Well, famously, Lewis and Nico Rosberg were very closely matched in one US Grand Prix at Mercedes till about 2/3 through the race, when I think the track surface changed. There was a bit more, it was a bit slippery oil and stuff, but there's definitely some more crosswind, and Lewis just disappeared from Nico. So Lewis, as Mark just said, very instinctive and very, very good at reacting to the variables as they come in, with that nice big sweet spot that he created then. Whether he still has the size sweet spot today, I doubt, at Ferrari, but I suspect Charles has still got that ability to manage that. But of course, Max is so good. I think that's one area where he probably still has quite a big advantage over George, for example, and certainly the two McLaren drivers. And that is when conditions change, as we've just discussed, tailwind for Friday, Saturday, potential headwind on Sunday. That's the sort of thing that will bring the best out in Max, and his ability, if he's got understeer, to massage that understeer, if he's got an unstable rear as a result, to live with that, and look after the time management as well. So that's where I would say Max is by far and away the best guy. This is a super chat. Sadly, Mark is now gone, but I'll read it anyway. Thank you very much indeed, Max 790. Very kind of you. Mr. Slade. We don't have to call him Mr. Slade. Call him Mark. Having seen Kimi, Lewis and Alonso up close, do you agree with Mark Priestley that at his best, Kimi was the most naturally talented, quickest of the three? He said he was simply not as dedicated. Okay, well, that's a good question, which I will bring on next live stream we do, Mac. So thank you for asking that. I think we've covered how good Kimi was, and he thinks Kimi was as good as anyone when he was at his best at that time. But was he lacking in dedication? That's the question I'm going to put to Mark. My gut feeling is he's going to say no, he wasn't at that time at McLaren. He was very dedicated. But we'll let Mark speak for that. But thank you for that. I will now actually copy that. Well, we'll see it on the replay anyway. Thank you very much. So, yeah, there's a lot of questions that were related to Mark. There's one for Peter. Grant Joseph. Peter, what do you make of the fact that George still has no employment in 26? Is it anything more than arguing the details? Love your insights. Perfect for my demographic who found Formula One in the 90s as kids. Well, thank you very much. Yeah, of course it is. I mean, he's not going to drive anywhere else, is he? He's going to be at Merck. And interestingly, the longer Toto leaves it, if it is over money, the more expensive it's going to be for him. And so, after Singapore, I would say George's stock has gone up, 50% probably. And so that was, Toto's, in theory, I imagine, I understand his background is Wall Street, doing a good job on Wall Street and the London stock market. But I would say right now, he hasn't really, if he's still left it open and he's still negotiating money, he's made a mistake because it will be costing him a lot more. George is no idiot, that's for sure. So, Ginomeni 1878. Good morning, Peter. Everyone is talking about Mercedes being the best, particularly for 26, but Japanese people don't like to brag. And with Adrian Newey in house, don't you think they'll have the best package next year? Well, it's not so much Adrian Newey. Of course, Adrian Newey, because he knows the Honda people well, and he knows how to manage them. Because when they left McLaren for Red Bull, they were disorganized. And McLaren's philosophy was to do everything in Japan and have some McLaren people over there. But it was a mess because, as I know, working with Williams in the Williams Honda days, Honda were at their best when they were managed quite strictly by people like Patrick Head. In this case, Adrian Newey, I think, was right on top of how to get the best from Honda, and he very quickly expanded the base they already had at Milton Keynes conveniently for their touring car, British touring car engine development. And the result was Red Bull Honda powertrains, and what a great package it is. And now, on top of that, they have Andy Cowell, who used to run Mercedes powertrain, did a great job in all the championship years, with Adrian running, if you like, Aston Martin powertrain with Honda. So I have absolutely no doubt that will be an outstanding power unit next year with all those people. It has to be. In terms of the car, as Mark said, it depends really on how many people, good people, Adrian has been able to get around him. But because it's a very, very short step from Milton Keynes to Silverstone, you don't even need to move house. I suspect he's going to get a lot of good people to go there. So there we go. Taylor 80277. Hi, Peter. What was the relationship like between Damon and Nigel in 94? Damon didn't seem happy when Nigel congratulated Michael in Adelaide. You know what? I don't think Nigel meant anything by doing that. He just probably, knowing Nigel, he is so focused on his own career and his own doing a good job for his family and his life and for himself, that he wouldn't even remembered that shunt between Michael and Damon in Adelaide, and he would have just gone up to Michael in a well-meaning way and shaken his hand. Nothing meant against Damon. And I think, as far as I can remember, well, not as far as I can remember, as far as I know, Nigel was always very supportive of Damon when he was in the test role at Williams in 91, 92, around there. He was very supportive of Damon. So what was it like after the passing of Ayrton and Nigel came in to do those races? Probably Nigel came in with the aura of, I'm Nigel Mansell, this is the way things should be done because I've won championships. And probably there would have been moments when Damon thought, well, that's not right, that shouldn't be happening, or whatever. And then Nigel wouldn't have entered Nigel's peripheral vision that Damon was feeling that way, I suspect. So I would say, in answer to your question, from Nigel's perspective, I think the relationship was very, very good. From Damon's perspective, I can understand that he probably felt that Nigel wasn't quite as sympathetic towards him as he could have been. D-Dub 5770. Hi Peter, love these streams. Thank you very much. How do we create more of a buzz about the tech in Formula One rather than just driver things? Well, that's why, exactly why, I've got Mark on the show, hopefully on a regular basis. And we'll still have Scarbs as well. Because it's too easy, I think, for the Netflix generation to completely sidestep the technology of Formula One. And I say too easy, and the implication of that is they should be taking account of it. I say that only because Formula One always likes to tell us that part of their DNA is this technology and the ability and the necessity for every team to design and create its own cars. And we have these great names, Ferrari, McLaren, Red Bull, Mercedes, as a result. But all the Netflix focus really is on the drivers, and most of the next generation of Formula One fans is focused very much on the drivers and the glamour and the type of shoes they wear and the quality and what watches they've got and the girlfriends and the wives and all the rest of it. And there's very little talk about ride heights and torsional stiffness. And so I find that fascinating. Mark obviously finds that fascinating. As he said in his last answer, he's not interested in having a race just in equal cars because the whole appeal of Formula One for him is the technology. And I agree with him 100%. And so all I can say is watch this show. If nobody else is taking that into account and wants to go into that sort of detail, and if Sky don't go into that sort of detail when they're doing their technology analysis or doing any of their analysis, then, what can I say? Watch this channel, because if you've got a guy like Mark or Scarbs to talk you through, basically, hopefully we'll cover all the technical questions that need to be answered. It's not that complicated. It's about people as much as it is about airflow and coefficients of drag. And Adrian, as Mark correctly said, absolutely correctly said, Adrian is about people more than he's about anything else. Without people, Adrian wouldn't be the guy that he is, the engineer that he is. So thank you for that comment. But all I can say is, tell your friends, tell anyone remotely interested in Formula One that we're going to be doing regular technological, all the time. The technology is going to be the underpinning of our shows. And understanding Formula One is about understanding the technology. Then you have a feel for why this car is doing this, why this car is doing that, why this driver is driving this way, why this team has to work around this driver's specific style. All those things add up, rather than just taking them from the surface of, oh, this guy won the race, he's in good form, or however they want to explain it. And we can start to get some real understanding of the sport. I don't think it's going to change in terms of the liberty level. I think we can see where they think the selling points of Formula One are. But certainly from my perspective, it will always be underpinned by technology, everything we do here. And on the back of that, just kind of echoing what I just said from Kali Hassan 2004. Hi Peter, I started watching Formula One in 2022 and I didn't come from Netflix. I promise I've learned so much thanks to you and your channel. Well, thank you very much. Great. So there we go. Rogan's TWA. Liam Lawson put in a good time at the Goodwood Rally stage. He did, but then so did Martin Vidaga, who was driving the Terry Neuville Hyundai i20 Rally 1. I think he was quickest, actually. I think he was quicker than Liam, and he's a co-driver. So I don't think we should put too much store on that. No offense meant to Mr. Vidaga, who's a good friend and actually a very funny, nice guy. But yeah, I think he was quicker than Liam. Okay, that was a question from Mark. A lot of questions. If you didn't get your question answered by Mark today, please keep going because we're going to do more. David Jocklots 9558. Hi, Peter. Another question. Is that a genuine Rodriguez helmet on your shelf? Thanks. No, if you look, I do put quite a lot of detail in the description, which is below this video. When it sits on the channel, you will see the description. And I put messages to viewers and stuff in there, and whatever the topic of the day might be, I kind of put a mention in for that. And obviously all our sponsors and backers for the show have their say there as well. So please have a look at that description. It would be a great thing for the development of the channel if you did. That's the first point. Secondly, I do mention the Rodriguez
helmet there, which is actually created. It is not original, sadly. It was created by my friend Diego Moreno in Madrid. He's currently in Mexico. He's going to be working in Mexico at the Grand Prix. He's just done a great job. He started building replica helmets, really, really good replicas a while ago now, and he's got a lot of the drivers' helmets. But he's a massive Rodriguez fan, being Mexican. And he sent me that the other day as a gift. So there it is up there. It's Pedro's last Bell Star, which was silver with the black stripe, which I loved. I loved the way he sat in the BRM P153 with that. In fact, he sent me a BRM P153, and I'll show it to you now. One of my favorite Grand Prix cars of all time, the Yardley BRM, and I've still got it in this because I just don't want it to get dusty or anything. But look at that, absolutely gorgeous. That's the car with which Pedro won the 1970 Belgian Grand Prix at Spa, and it's just perfect from every angle, beautifully done. And of course, that's the race where Chris Amon finished second in the March, and was just sort of waiting for Pedro's V12 to blow up, and it was putting out the usual amount of oil, and they always blow up, those BRM engines. And guess what? It didn't blow up. Chris actually went flat through the master kink, I think, on one lap to try to get as near as he could to get a tow, but it couldn't get past Pedro, and Pedro won that race. So anyway, good question. Thank you very much. Pedro's helmet, he looked great. He always sat low in the car, Pedro, and great guy. Mono, I think we're going to have to make this the last question or comment, if we may, because I've still got quite a lot on. Dexter's unbelievable. He's been asleep. I tell you what, you're probably aware that I've been using a second webcam to film Mark, which I will clear up the reflections we had. I'll get a hood. I noticed that Darren Heath, the very, very good Formula One photographer, when he's in the media center editing his digital images that he's just taken that day, he has a laptop like you and I probably, but he has a big hood over the screen of the laptop to stop reflection. I'm going to get one of these Darren Heath hoods, and next time there'll be no reflection on the screen there. Anyway, getting back to it, this is, very kind. Just wanted to say you should still be involved in Formula One. Maybe thank you very much. Analysis, Formula One TV, Sky Sports. Well, thank you very much. Only if, of course, it is there's a technological underflow to what we're saying, because, I found it quite frustrating working for some TV networks. I worked for a few, all of whom wanted to skim the surface of what was going on, and very short interviews and short analyses, and that was always very irritating. Anyway, I'm just going to go back to the Mark Slade camera now. And there, I think you'll see Dexter. He's black, so you won't, is that, you see him there? Dexter, here you go. Say hello. There he is. Being very, very good. He's been sleeping just down there, lying down there during the show. The dulcet tones of Mark Slade put him to sleep, and he's been there ever since, waiting for this to stop and go for his long walk. So there we are, which we will do. I'd got lots of other stuff ready to show you, which probably aren't relevant now. But there was a question in the previous live stream about Tazio Nuvolari and how I rated Nuvolari, and I found this picture I took of. That's Tazio on the right, obviously statue, and there's Giulio Bossari, one of the great Ferrari chief mechanics, and that was in Tazio's hometown. And yeah, you can see the TN on they've done it really well on the yellow, it would have been yellow in real life, t-shirt that he had. And so, yeah, I also put together this quick compilation of the US Grand Prix 69 and 71, because I was thinking US Grand Prix, it's an interesting race because there have been a lot of firsts there. Of course, you could pick any number, but Innes Ireland won his only Grand Prix at Watkins Glen in 61. Mario Andretti was on the pole for his first ever race at Watkins Glen in 68. Emerson Fittipaldi won his first Grand Prix at Watkins Glen in 1970. 69, Jochen Rindt won his first Grand Prix at Watkins Glen.
and that was in the Lotus 49B. And in 71, Francois Seber won his first and sadly only Grand Prix as well at Watkins Glen. There have been several others as well, but I courtesy of AP, our friends and colleagues, I put this compilation together just to celebrate two of those, which was 69 Jochen Rindt winning for Lotus, and then 71 Francois Seber winning in the Tyrrell. Very, very short. So literally, 1 minute for the two. It's just stuff that I put together from AP archive, and here we are. You can see there 69, the start was down after what is the last corner, or the first corner today. It was a big crowd that year because it was the biggest paying race. Denny Hulme slow away from the line in the McLaren. He was very quick in practice but had gear selection problems. Then leading up to the fast S's up the hill. That was one of the characteristic signature parts of Watkins Glen. And Jochen Rindt very early on gets into a battle with Jackie Stewart in the Matra MS80. Jackie's already clinched the championship in 69 at Monza, feeling a bit more relaxed, I suppose, about things. But as ever, there's going to be a big battle. That's John Surtees in the BRM, who eventually finishes an excellent third, his best position of the year in the BRM. But Jochen and Jackie have a replay of their Silverstone battle. Jochen is doing very well. Jackie eventually fades with engine problems and an oil leak, leaving Jochen in a relatively clean, clear bit of road, and he goes on to win. There he is in the Gold Leaf 49. Low wing, of course, they started that 69 year with high wings. There's Jackie in the MS80 Matra, beautiful car, both with Cosworth engines, the Lotus 49, that they are flashing through the S's there. There's John in the BRM being chased by Denny Hulme, who's making up ground now in the McLaren. But sadly, it was far too short a space for Denny to be up in the final results. From his perspective, he was as quick as anyone. But nonetheless, the race win went as Tex Hopkins jumping in the air in his lavender suit to celebrate Jochen Rindt winning his first Grand Prix in 69. His teammate Graham Hill, meanwhile, has had a big accident. I'll talk about that in a second. Here's Jochen in the winner's circle. No podium then as such. It was just the winner's circle. And a lot of money went the way of Jochen Rindt and Team Lotus as a result of that win. You can see Colin there in the background, and Jochen delighted to have won his first Grand Prix. His third win in a Lotus, because of course he won 2 rounds of the Tasman Series. And now we move on to 71. The start now is before that corner. It's been moved. The circuit's now 1 mile longer. It's 3.3 instead of 2.3. Really nice track. And very early on, Francois Seber, Jackie Stewart in the Tyrrells pull away from the pack. Jackie has a problem with tyre vibration and drops back after about 12 laps, leading Francois Seber, his teammate, who's had 2 second places at that point in 71, to win. That's not a shunt there, that's just cement dust from some oil. And Seber goes on to win this 71 race, which was an interesting race because it featured such drivers as Helmut Marko in a BRM. And this is obviously as a result of Pedro Rodriguez's sad accident at the Norris Ring, about which we've spoken on this channel. His place effectively taken by Peter Gethin and Howden Ganley. Howden Ganley drove really well in this race as well for BRM, as did Mike Hailwood in the 30s. That's Beltoise in the Matra V12. Sounds absolutely gorgeous, screaming through the hills. And there's Tex Hopkins again doing the jump as Francois Seber takes the checkered flag from Joe Siffert in a misfiring BRM, and Ronnie Peterson, who's recovered from a midfield grid position. Francois wipes his face, waves to the crowd. What a guy, what a driver, wins his first Grand Prix. And very sadly, of course, it was at Watkins Glen in 73, 2 years later, that Francois lost his life on those fast S's. He was a great racing driver, very, very quick. And as Jackie, I don't think it's any exaggeration to say, that, as Jackie Stewart did, that had he lived, Francois probably would have won the World Championship in 1974. And here's a picture I treasure, which I've got in my collection. That's a great Nigel Snowden shot of Francois. It was actually put out in an Elf Tyrrell press pack, which is why I have it. It was an Elf promotional photograph, and I got Francois to sign it for me. What a guy, what a star, what an absolute star. But going back to that 69 US Grand Prix. It was an interesting race because it was effectively the swan song for all four-wheel drive cars in Formula One. 69 was the year in which everybody, most teams, McLaren, Lotus, Tyrrell, tried four-wheel drive. And it was good, but it was very heavy, and it caused a lot of other problems within the car. And so by the end of the year, most teams had decided it was not the way to go. But interestingly, Mario Andretti was given the four-wheel drive Lotus 63 at the Glen that year in 69, didn't do anything with it. It was a great waste of Mario's talent, really, I think. And we had other cars as well. Johnny Servo's Gamin drove the four-wheel drive Matra. And other interesting results in 69 were that Graham Hill had a massive shunt in the other Lotus 49 when he'd slid off on some oil, what they call the loop, and in order to get back in the race, he'd stalled. I don't know what happened actually, because there were no pictures of this. I've never seen any. Graham effectively got out of the car and pushed it back into a place where the marshals could help him get back onto the track. What he did in 1965 at Monaco. So he did it once, he'd do it again. And of course he then drove off, they got the thing going, and he was going past the pits not long afterwards, and no seatbelts on, of course, because he'd had to take them off. And he's going past the pits and he felt he had a puncture or something and sort of said to them, I'm coming in next lap. And on that lap, the car went sideways, more or less at the same place on the loop, and he had a massive shunt and was thrown out and broke both legs. I guess if there was ever a moment when anybody was in doubt that seatbelts were the way to go in Formula One, it was then. Graham recovered and continued to race in Formula One. 70 drove for Rob Walker. 71 went to Brabham and didn't do very well. He would have been in that race, that 71 US Grand Prix, driving the Ron Toronac Brabham. And then, of course, he set up his own team, Embassy Hill. But 69, yeah, it was a difficult year for some, but a brilliant year in terms of Jackie Stewart versus Jochen Rindt and Jochen scoring that first win. And here was Jochen Rindt's Christmas card that year, 69. Look at that. Managed by Bernie Eccleston at the time. So you can see the emphasis on the dollar sign there. American Grand Prix 69 prize fund. There's Jochen walking away with it, $53,000 on the sack. Doesn't seem like much today, but it was then, believe me. And that was signed, of course, by Jochen and Nina. And that is a picture I took of Jochen. I think I mentioned this on a live stream earlier. First thing he did when he got out of the car, having won the International 100 at Warwick Farm in 69, his second win for Lotus on the back of that win at Wigram in New Zealand. There's Nina on the left. She's got a cigarette. And there she is. I think, well, somebody else is lighting up Jochen's. First thing he did, gold leaf, of course. I was very impressed that there were gold leaf cigarettes. And there's Jochen. He just got out of the car, having dominated that race in the wet. And first thing he did, light up. So, yeah, Jochen Rindt. There we are. Good live stream. Thank you very much for everybody and your input, comments. Sorry if we didn't get to you, but please keep trying. And remember, from here on in, if you want real understanding of the technology and what impact it has on the drivers and the people and how it works in Formula One, this is your port of call, our channel. So tell your friends, recommend it, and of course, follow and subscribe if you haven't. Subscription. I think I mentioned my mate, who's a Virgin captain, thought it cost a lot of money to subscribe to Peter's YouTube channel. Well, it doesn't. It's completely free. It's just a good thing to do to help the channel along. So please do that. And yeah, I'll be back with the normal videos in the next couple of days, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, late nights of the US Grand Prix at Austin, Texas. So watch for those. Then we'll do some more live streams next week. So thanks for watching. Take care. See you soon.